Okay, so we are speaking with Professor Michael Pal, who is an expert in public law and democracy law, election law. Can you tell us a little bit about your current research and how you got interested in it?
For sure, thanks for having me. So I study the law of democracy, which is basically all the rules and institutions and legal processes around how we have elections and how politics works. That's proven to be a very controversial topic recently. So a lot of what I'm doing these days is talking about democratic decline. And is that really happening? And if so, how can we manage it? So there's countries around the world like Hungary and Poland and South Africa and maybe Japan and a bunch of others where there's still elections and there's still democracies, but all the broader norms and values about protections for the right to vote, free political expression, equal participation for all individuals are potentially under threat. And Canada is not immune either to those kind of challenges. And how we had a big controversy around the Fair Elections Act. Discussion just happening right now about elections in the city of Toronto. Federal government's parliament, is considering right now election legislation. There's a case in front of the Supreme Court about whether Canadians who live outside of the country for more than 5 years should lose their right to vote or not. So there's a whole host of issues about how democracy actually works, how governments become legitimate, and so those are the questions that fascinate me. So you could say it's part of constitutional law, it's part of public law. A lot of it is comparative, but it's really I spend my time thinking about how we can make democracy better, and are there ways we can protect it from those who aren't as committed to it as I think they should be.
So how did you get interested in this topic, in this area of the law?
So I had a background in political science, like maybe a lot of law students, maybe some of you in first year. So I'd always been interested in politics. Spent a little bit of time working in and around politics when I was younger. And then I actually was a parliamentary intern, which is a nonpartisan program with the Canadian Political Science Association. And you work for a couple different MPs on the Hill in a nonpartisan role. It's kind of a legislative assistant. And one of the MPs I had was a guy by the name of Jacques Sada, who was from a greater kind of Montreal area riding. And he was on the Standing Committee on Procedure and House Affairs, which to all the interns sounded really boring. But it ended up being the committee that dealt with redrawing of federal electoral boundaries. And so in helping him through that, I ended up learning a lot about that process and writing a little bit about it, and then that kind of sparked an interest in these broader issues around election law and voting rights and campaign finance law and the legal side of democracy. And then I ended up going to law school and then in Canada, and then going to study with some people at NYU who kind of founded election law as a field, I think it's fair to say, and just went from there. So it just happened to be from working in politics and then landing in a milieu that sounded maybe boring on this committee and then turned out to be really fascinating.
That's super interesting. So can you tell us a little bit about what's been challenging about researching this area of the law, or what's been, disappointing about what the developments that you were talking about?
There's been a few different things. I mean, one is I think in Canada sometimes we have this not superiority is the wrong word, but we can be complacent about some of the things that make this that make the country what it is. Some of the institutions, how our democracy functions in elections, and so occasionally in trying to say there's ways we could do better, and there's ways we could improve. You sometimes meet with resistance saying, well, things are a lot better here than in some other place, and you don't want to be accused of being cynical or skeptic all the time. But I think democracy is fragile, and some of the things that are happening in the U.S. and elsewhere have shown that it is fragile, and it's something that we have to nurture. But occasionally there's challenges in trying to persuade people, because it's easy to find an example around the world It's also a very political area. So as an academic, I want to stick to principles. But when you say this is how you should regulate political speech on Facebook, that's seen as having political consequences for one party or another party or one leader or another leader. If you say this is how we should draw electoral boundaries, that has really direct electoral consequences. So trying to stay above the partisan fray is one of the challenges for sure.
And what's been the most exciting aspect of this research that you've been working on, or something new that you'd like to maybe let people know about?
I find it exciting in a bunch of different ways. I get up every day and work on it. I think being able to have a kind of real world, translating these academic ideas into a real world impact has been very gratifying. So I was recently on, provincial government appointed me the Far North Electoral Boundaries Commission for the province of Ontario, where we did consultations in the north, and including with Indigenous communities. We were the first commission that had Indigenous majority, and we probably did the most extensive consultations in the north of Ontario that have ever happened around electoral boundaries. And as a result, more Indigenous MPPs were elected than ever before in Ontario in those ridings. I've also worked with governments on changing their campaign finance laws, testified in front of parliamentary committees on amendments, seen my academic research quoted in the House of Commons as the basis for change in the law. So that's all been very gratifying when you can see actual concrete differences being made that I would like to think have helped Canadian democracy.
And so what one piece of advice would you have for first-year students who are starting their careers in law, reflecting back on where you've come from and the work that you've done thus far? What one piece of advice can you give?
That's a tough one because everybody is so different and has different goals. But I would say, I wouldn't necessarily have imagined I'd be doing what I'm doing now when I started. And if I think to the other people that I started law school with, very few of them are doing the kind of practice or the kind of work or in the kind of job that they saw themselves as going into the law to do. But I mean that in a good way, right? They've discovered new things and found new avenues that they found exciting, and which get them up every morning and going to the office. So be open to different possibilities. Try to meet as many people as you can, different kinds of work, because it may surprise you all the variety of possibilities that there are in the legal profession. And so that definitely was advice that someone gave me that served me well. So I would like to pass it on to our first-year students. And be patient with yourselves, right? You can't, it sometimes takes a few weeks or a few months or longer to quote-unquote get the law. I clerked for Justice Moldaver, who always tells the story about how he got a C+ in criminal law and is now on the Supreme Court of Canada in first year, and is now on the Supreme Court of Canada, and is agree or disagree with him, is known as an expert in criminal law. So so be patient and kind to yourselves in first year.
Yeah, I certainly have to say I did not envision myself to be here doing immigration law as well when I was in law school. So that is actually very, very true. Thank you for your time, Professor Pal, and welcome to first year, everyone.